walk through our cities with our eyes closed. We look at the massive stone blocks of our banks, our libraries, our Capitol buildings, and we accept the story we are told, that men with horses, buggies, and simple pulleys built these structures in a time of mud roads and candlelight. But have you ever stopped to really look? There is a glitch in the matrix of our history, a silence that screams louder than any noise. Today we are going to embark on a journey that will challenge the very foundation of what you know about the 19th century. We are not just talking about history. We are talking about a crime scene on a planetary scale. The victim was a global civilization of unimaginable grandeur. The evidence is scattered all around us, hidden in plain sight. And the motive is the most terrifying part of all. We will explore the ghost cities captured in early photography. We will dig up the buried ground floors of the mud flood. We will decode the impossible technology of star forts. And finally, we will answer the darkest question. Where did the population go? And who are the millions of orphans that suddenly appear to replace them? Get comfortable. Turn off the lights. Because for the next 50 minutes, we are going to rewrite the past. Welcome to the Great Reset. Let's travel back to the dawn of photography, the mid-1800s. You would expect the great capitals of the world, London, Paris, Moscow, St. Petersburg, to be bustling hives of activity. After all, this was the peak of the Industrial Revolution, wasn't it? But the photographs tell a different story, a haunting story. Look at the panoramic shots of San Francisco in the 1860s, or St. Petersburg. The architecture is finished. It is pristine. The streets are paved with geometric perfection. The layout is grand, designed for millions. But the streets are empty. Skeptics say it's the exposure time. They say the people move too fast for the camera. But where are the horses? Where are the market stalls? Where is the trash? Where is the life? Even with a long exposure, a busy city leaves ghosts, blurs of motion. But these streets look scrub clean. They look like a movie set, waiting for them actors to arrive. And when we do see people, they seem out of place. We see small groups of men, dressed in rags, wandering aimlessly among giant columns. We see them leaning against walls, looking bewildered. They don't look like the builders of these majestic palaces. They look like survivors or squatters, inheriting a kingdom they do not understand. Why are there no trees? Why are there no gardens? Just miles and miles of stone, silent and dead. This is not a civilization in bloom. This is a graveyard of architecture. Let's talk about the buildings themselves. The official narrative says these were built in the 1800s, often in just a few years, by people who mostly traveled on dirt roads. Does that make sense to you? Look at the sheer scale. The doors of these old-world buildings are often 20 feet high. The ceilings soar to 40 feet. The steps are too steep for comfort. The door handles are placed absurdly high. Who builds a door that big for a human being? And the materials: granite, marble, quartz, blocks weighing tons, quarried hundreds of miles away, transported without trucks, and cut with laser-like precision. We are told that farmers with chisels did this. But today, with diamond saws and cranes, we struggle to replicate this level of detail. Look at the capitals in the United States. Almost every state has one. They all look like Roman temples. They all have massive domes. We are told they were built in the middle of nowhere, before the towns were even fully established. Why build a palace when you barely have a population? Unless they weren't built by us. Unless they were already there, and we just repaired them, renamed them, and claimed them as our own. We are living in the shell of a greater past, like hermit crabs moving into an empty shell found on the beach. If they didn't build these structures just for beauty, then what were they for? This brings us to the most fascinating part of the theory: the star forts. Open Google Earth. Look at the Netherlands. Look at Florida. Look at Japan. Look at Vietnam. All over the world, there are massive geometric earthworks shaped like perfect stars. History calls them forts. They say they were for defense against cannonballs, but that explanation falls apart when you look at the geometry. They are fractals. They are complex cymatic shapes, the shapes sound makes in water. Why build a defensive fort with such complex sacred geometry that can only be seen from the sky? The theory is these were not forts, they were power plants. The old world ran on a different kind of energy, atmospheric etheric energy. The huge cathedral, the obelisks, the towers with metal spires. They weren't just religious symbols, they were antennas. They harvested energy from the sky. The star forts acted as capacitors, collecting and distributing this frequency resonance. This was a civilization of free energy, clean, wireless, and abundant. And perhaps that is why they had to be destroyed. Because you cannot meter free energy, you cannot sell it. But how do you destroy a global civilization? How do you wipe the slate clean? You bury it. Let's look at the ground beneath your feet. In thousands of cities in Russia, in America, in Europe, we see the same anomaly. We call it the mud flood. Walk down a street in an old city. Look at the basements. Why do the basements have windows? Why do they have fancy arched doors that lead straight into a wall of dirt? Architects don't design windows to look into soil. Excavations consistently reveal that these basements are actually the first floors. The buildings continue downwards, 10, 15 feet below the current street level. We are walking on top of the roofs of the past. Sometime in the mid-19th century, a massive cataclysm occurred. a liquefaction of the soil, a flood of mud and clay that swept across the continents, burying the bottom floors of the entire world. It choked the streets, it stopped the machines, and it likely killed the majority of the adult population. When the survivors or the new settlers arrived, they didn't dig the buildings out. They simply smoothed out the mud, paved over it, and turned the second floor into the new ground floor. The evidence is literally under our feet, but we are too busy looking at our phones to notice. After the catastrophe, the reset began. There were still too many remnants of the old glory. The new rulers had to hide the past by showing it off one last time and then destroying it. Enter the world fairs of the late 19th and early 20th centuries. Chicago, St. Louis, San Francisco, Paris, We are told these were temporary cities built of plaster and hemp, just for an expo. But look at the photos. The White City of Chicago in 1893 looked better than Rome. Massive domes, electric lights reflecting in man-made lagoons, moving sidewalks. They say they built this in 2 years. In a swamp with temporary materials. And then, as soon as the fair was over, they burned it all down or threw it into the trash. Does that sound logical? To build the greatest architectural marvels the world has ever seen, just to destroy them a year later? The theory suggests these were not temporary. These were the restored centers of the old world cities. The elite opened them up to the public for a brief time to program the population and establish the narrative. And then they destroyed the evidence. They burned the old world tech, smashed the statues, and left only a few buildings behind as museums. The world fairs were the funeral rites of the previous civilization. So the cities were buried, the technology was hidden, but a civilization needs people to run it. The adults were gone, or too few. This brings us to the most heartbreaking piece of the puzzle, the era of the orphan. Suddenly, in the mid to late 19th century, millions of children appeared from nowhere. The records show a spike in foundlings that defies biological explanation. Orphanages were built on an industrial scale. We are not talking about small houses with a kind nanny. We are talking about massive brick factories designed to process thousands of children. In New York alone, tens of thousands of children roam the streets. History blames wars, but the math doesn't work. The numbers were too high. And why were they all the same age? It was as if a generation of parents had simply evaporated, or perhaps these children were not born in the traditional sense. Perhaps they were the repopulation stock, brought in to inherit the empty cities. If you think the idea of manufacturing a population is too sci-fi, you need to look at Martin Coney and his Incubator sideshows. At the exact same time as the orphan explosion, premature babies became a form of entertainment. At Coney Island, And at those mysterious world fairs, visitors paid 25 cents to watch babies in glass boxes. Martin County, a man with no medical degree, ran these exhibits for 40 years. Why were there so many premature babies? Why were parents giving them to a showman at a carnival? And why were these exhibits often placed next to the eugenics sections? It looks suspiciously like a cover for a mass rearing program, a way to normalize the technology of artificial wombs, or at least industrialize care. These children were raised by the state or by corporations behind glass walls. They had no parents, no lineage, no history. They were the perfect blank slates. The elite always hide the truth in plain sight. Look at the vintage postcards from the early 1900s. The Cabbage Patch Babies, the babies in eggs, the storks. We think they are cute, but read the captions. À vendre, for sale. The harvest is good this year. Do you want a baby? Pick one. They depicted babies growing in fields, row after row, like crops. They showed babies being delivered by zeppelins, by trains, in bulk. This wasn't just humor. This was soft disclosure. They were telling us exactly what was happening. The population was being harvested, distributed, and sold. The Cabbage Patch wasn't a fairy tale. It was a metaphor for the repopulation program. And we know the delivery system existed. It was real. It was called the Orphan Trains. This is a documented historical fact. For 75 years, trains loaded with children left the crowded cities of the East Coast and headed into the empty West. Over 250,000 children were transported. Imagine the scene. A train pulls into a small, dusty town in Nebraska. The doors open. Hundreds of children, scared, silent, are marched onto a platform. The locals come out. They inspect the children. They check their teeth. They feel their muscles. If you were strong, you were taken to work on a farm. If you were small or sick, you were put back on the train. Siblings were ripped apart. Names were changed. You are no longer Smith. You are now Jones. Their memories of the past were erased. Their identity was overwritten. This was the mechanism of the reset. These children were the seeds, scattered across the desolate, mud-flooded lands to restart the economy. Now, step back. Look at the whole picture. First, the empty cities, magnificent, impossible architecture standing silent. Second, the star forts, evidence of advanced free energy technology. Third, the mud flood, a global catastrophe that buried the ground floors and likely wiped out the adults. Fourth, the world fairs, the programming centers where the old world was shown and then destroyed. Fifth, the orphans, the millions of parentless children used to repopulate. And finally, the indoctrination, a new education system, a new history, given to children who had no elders to tell them the truth. This is the theory of the Great Reset. It suggests that we are a civilization with amnesia. We are not the pinnacle of evolution. We are the survivors of a crash. We are living in the ruins of a society that was far more advanced, spiritually and technologically, than we are today. We simply inherited their house, burned their furniture for heat, and forgot who built it. The history books are not a record of what happened. They are a script written to explain away the ruins, to hide the free energy, and to keep us working in a system of scarcity. Why does this matter? Why dig up the past? Because if it happened once, it can happen again. And because, deep down, you feel it. When you stand in a grand cathedral or look at a star fort, you feel a resonance, a memory in your DNA. You know that humanity was meant for more than just paying taxes and dying. You know that we were once giants. The Tartaria theory, or the mud flood theory, isn't just about old buildings. It's about potential. It's about realizing that we have been lied to about our capabilities. They hid the free energy. They hid our history, but they couldn't hide the stones. The stones still speak. Thank you for joining me on this journey into the forbidden history. Don't believe me blindly. Go out, look at your city, look at the basements, look at the old maps. Be the detective of your own reality. Because once you see the cracks in the matrix, you can never unsee them.